What's up, guys? Welcome to the bowl preview edition of the Red and White podcast. We're going to try our best to give you some sort of an outlook on the game. We told y'all we'd study up, but it's just kind of hard. We don't know anything about them. So we are joined by Justin Strawn. He's the co-editor of Maroon and White Nation, which is a Mississippi State blog, and he's host of the Bully Bark Line, which is a Mississippi State podcast, as well as a radio show that goes out throughout the state, I believe. So how are you, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Living the dream, I think. So we really appreciate you joining us, man. You're going to help us a lot. So,
well, you're going to help me too, as well, because I haven't had a chance to look at NC State too much so far. So it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry for what you're going to see because it hurts, but...
Dustin, let me ask you this before Dustin gets into it. When you heard the matchup and the bowl selection, what was your initial thought?
I thought it was a good matchup for both teams. I think there's a lot of similarities between the two schools, and honestly, it's a good preview because they're on the schedule for each other in a few years. I don't remember exactly what the years are lined up, so it's nice to get a little early acquaintance with a team that we'll see in a few years.
Yeah, I think
that's 2021.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's not that far away. Though it sounds like it's Star Trek time.
True, it does.
So, looking at Mississippi State, y'all finished, I think, 4-4 in conference and 8-4 overall.
Correct.
Your summary of the season, as you saw it, was it a success, a letdown?
You know, it's kind of a weird situation for Mississippi State to be in, especially with most of the fans. If you had told most fans going into, I would say probably most fans expected around 8-4, but that wasn't what most people around the country were saying. A lot of people, just because of the division that Mississippi State plays in the SEC West, they thought Mississippi State was going to be a decent team, but they thought getting to 6 wins would be a struggle. So, you know, we heard all season long that we're going to struggle to get to 6 wins. You know, we'll beat our 4 non-conference teams. We should beat Kentucky, but finding a 6th win somewhere will be difficult. And we ended up with 8. So you'd think we'd be pretty happy with things, but at the end, losing as poorly as we did to Alabama and Ole Miss has kind of offset a lot of it's a lot of mixed feelings in Mississippi State about how well the season did go or didn't go. There's a lot of things to be excited about. There's a lot of things to look back on the season and say we really missed a lot of opportunities.
Is part of that expectation from the really good year y'all had previously, like 2014? And then, bringing Prescott back and having, high expectations for a senior quarterback.
Yeah, the only person that really came back that was a significant contributor to the team was Prescott. And that's where we put a lot of our hopes on him. We thought that there was a lot of fans probably had overblown expectations just because of last year. Because anytime that Mississippi State gets 8 wins, that's typically going to be a success. I mean, throughout the course of the history of the school, 8 wins is not a common thing. So, normally you're pretty pumped up about it. So, it just kind of shows where the program has come from in the past 6 or 7 years under Dan Mullen. It's testament to him. But it's like he always says, he's raising his own bar that he has to get over.
That sounds extremely familiar, right, Dustin?
It really does. 8 wins for us is typically a good year as well. We've had 10, I think, once. Yeah. And a lot of our problem, too, is I know we're not in the SEC West, but our division of the Atlantic, we've got to deal with Florida State and Clemson every year.
Right, exactly.
So
North Carolina stepped up their game this year.
Yeah, that hurt, but but it's just a constant struggle of how are we going to get to the top of our division, let alone compete for the conference,
right? When
there's such strong competition there, and I think that might be a little bit of what y'all have to deal with as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it's always. Last year Mississippi State finished second. They were number 1 in the country for 4 or 5 weeks in a row, and they were going well, and then they got to Alabama, and they just couldn't get past that hurdle, and ended up losing to Ole Miss last year. It basically kind of the same thing this year. They lost a couple of games earlier this year, but just getting past Alabama and then losing for the second year in a row to Ole Miss just really stung.
So that leads into my next question. If you had one game back where you probably think you should have won or you lost, what game would it be?
It'd be a coin flip between. It would have to say LSU just because they lost 21-19. There's a couple of plays in there where it should have gone Mississippi State's way. Some ways in which they bungled it. Dak Prescott had Ashton Shumpert open for a 2-point conversion that would have tied the game. It wasn't a very good throw, so he has some blame there, but it was still catchable, and Ashton Shumpert missed it, so it was kind of a blame on both of them. But still, at the very final minute, they were driving. They had a chance to set up a game-winning field goal. There was some confusion about the play call, and ended up getting a delay of game. Pushed what would have been a 46-yard field goal. They were hoping to set up one more play, get a little bit closer, but then pushing it back 5 yards, ended up being a 51-yard field goal. They missed it and ended up losing that game. That's the biggest one. Texas A&M, there's a lot of things that I didn't like about that one as well, but the one that probably most Mississippi State fans are just kicking themselves over is the LSU game because they had a chance at that one.
Yeah, I think if you look at our season, people are going to point to the Louisville and Virginia Tech games and say the conversation will be completely different had we won one of those games.
Right.
And I feel like it's kind of a similar situation for you guys as well.
I would think so. I mean, losing to Ole Miss is always going to be difficult for a Mississippi State fan to accept, but especially when it was at home, because this was the first time that Ole Miss had beaten Mississippi State in Starkville since 2003.
Oh, wow.
So that was, it's always been a home-dominated series. I mean, up until this year, the only time that a home team had lost in the series since 1999 was 2003 and 2010, and both Ole Miss and Mississippi State in those years were just terrible. So I think the Mississippi State fans were just expecting a win this year because it was at home. We had our best player ever in Dak Prescott, and it was a bit of a shock. I think some fans are still reeling from that.
All right, so going on to try and focus on the next game, if I want to be specific to say NC State fans, because do y'all just go by state there? Or?
We do.
Yeah. Okay,
we do.
so NC State fans, if they hear Mississippi State, they pretty much think Dak Prescott, and that's about it. That's all we know. I mean, Is he the real deal like we hear and think he is?
He is, and there's no getting around that. And what's sad is he got a lot of publicity last year in 2014, but he was a far better player this year. The numbers, if you look at the numbers, they probably won't match up quite as well as they did last year just because he did so much more running football last year than he did this year. But if you were to just pull up his stats, you could probably tell exactly just looking at the stats what he did through the course of his career. His sophomore year, he was a guy who was an okay passer, but was far more likely to hurt you using his legs. As a junior last year in 2014, he was very much a dual threat. He could beat you with his legs, he could beat you with his arm, but he got a little bit sloppy sometimes because he was so confident in his running ability that he would sometimes make some bad decisions throwing the football, and he wasn't quite as refined of a passer. But this year he took a huge step forward as a passer. His running numbers were way down, but mainly the reason the running numbers were down is because he had so much more faith in his ability to throw the ball, and he was such a much more accurate passer. His accuracy went from about 61.9% in 2014 up close to 67% this year.
Wow.
The interception numbers went way down. He did a lot to improve his ability as a passer this year. And like I said, the numbers, if you look at the total numbers, rushing and passing, he probably was a little bit short from last year, but just watching him play, watching him make the decisions and stuff that he does, he's a far better player this year, and he just didn't get the same notoriety that he got last year.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is.
Our secondary is lacking. So if he's accurate, you'll pick us apart. That's all there is to it.
Well, what's your pass rush like?
Hit or miss, honestly.
Hit or miss. That was been the one thing that has, in Mississippi State's 4 losses, the one thing that has gotten to them. Their offensive line is terrible. This Mississippi State offensive line, on a good day, they can do okay against average defensive lines and defensive front sevens. But the reason they lost every single game is because they didn't. LSU sacked Dak Prescott a couple times. Texas A&M did too, but they were constantly in his face. They were constantly hitting him and making him rush throws. He wasn't making bad throws, but he was having to get rid of the ball before he wanted to. And then Alabama and Ole Miss, it just fell apart. He got sacked 9 times against Alabama, another 7 times against Ole Miss. And that the downfall for Mississippi State this year has been the offensive line. We were hoping we lost 3 starters off of last year's team, and this year we thought that we had enough. The guys who were replacing them had played enough, but they just never really seemed to come together, especially against good pass rushers.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds eerily similar to us. I think our defensive line is young, but I think they're very good occasionally. And we've seen them take advantage of some of the less experienced offensive lines, but any of the good offensive lines, I think, our youth has really showed. But we have, 3 4-stars and a 5-star on the line. So you got to think that the talent is there, but they're all freshmen and sophomores.
And that will probably, they'll probably have a little bit. They'll probably have some success against Mississippi State in that regards. How much will it make a difference? I don't know. Will it force Prescott into bad passes? That I can't say. Like I said, I haven't seen NC State, so I know that y'all got one player, Mike Rose, is it?
Yeah, Mike Rose he's one of the few seniors we have on defense. And
I noticed he.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think he had 12.5 sacks this year.
I think when I looked at the stats, I saw 15 tackles for loss and like 9 sacks.
Yeah, it was something like that. He had a great year. He had an all ACC year by most accounts.
Right.
So but it's hit or miss. So he had a game with 4 sacks, and then he's had a couple games with 0 or 1. So we need consistency there, and I think that just comes from the rest of the guys. He's being the rest of the guys can double team Mike Rose, and a good offensive line can handle the rest of our young guys, which that's really hurt us some games.
Mm-hmm.
We're going back to Dak Prescott. I parallel him to Jacoby Brissett because it feels like, at least to me, senior quarterbacks coming out with high expectations. They both may have underachieved compared to what people expected, and take a lot of heat for it because they're the quarterbacks naturally. Do Mississippi State fans pick apart Dak Prescott as we did with Jacoby, like all year?
Oh gosh, no. I mean, Dak is a legend. I mean, we know that the only reason that we have 8 wins is because we had Dak Prescott on our team this year. If he had not been there, we would probably be looking at a 4 or 5, maybe 6-win team. Maybe if we would have had some breaks fall our way. There's no question that the reason that Mississippi State had any success at all this year was because of Dak Prescott. I mean, he's pretty much the AP named him first team All SEC. The coaches named him first team All SEC. Every publication I've seen in the postseason has named him as the first team All SEC quarterback. I mean, we know that if it weren't for Dak Prescott, we wouldn't have had any success whatsoever this year.
I mean, he does seem like your entire offense. Is that what you're saying, basically?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's really weird because Mississippi State is the identity of a Mississippi State program, of a good Mississippi State team, is a defense that is strong, can really shut down the opposing offense, and a running game that just grinds down the opponent. Well, the defense this year was kind of average. They were hit or miss. They had some injuries too, especially at the end of the year, that really hurt. And the running game just was non-existent. Well, I talked about the offensive line issues already, but the running backs didn't step up like we thought they would. The guy who was supposed to replace Josh Robinson, he was drafted by the Colts last year. He never did produce like we expected him to. He was a 4-star coming out of high school, and he just didn't do anything. And it made Mississippi State turn into this passing first offense that we've never ever seen. Because Mississippi State, if you go look at the history of our quarterbacks, you're not going to find much. So this whole idea of having a really good quarterback and a really good thrower is just really new to us, and it took us a while to kind of get adjusted to the fact that, if we're going to win, we're going to have to do it by throwing the ball.
What is it with the SEC and quarterbacks? You don't really relate the two together. I mean, like this year, I can't think of another good SEC quarterback that I would, really.
There were really only 3 this year. Chad Kelly had a really good year.
Oh yeah, he did have a good year. Yeah.
He had a lot of interceptions. That's the reason he got into the second team. Brandon out of Arkansas had a really good year as well. It's probably not as appreciated as much just because Arkansas ended up going 7-5.
Right.
But he had a really good year. But after that, there really wasn't a whole lot of really good quarterback play. I mean, it was so weird for Mississippi State fans because, I mean, I kept telling people, the one year that we've got, far and away the best quarterback in the entire league is the year that everybody's predicting us to finish last. And so it was a really weird position for Mississippi State fans to be in because we've never had good quarterback play. We've always relied on a strong running game and just hope and pray that your quarterback doesn't lose the game for you. And now all of a sudden we had the best one. And he was really, really good. I mean, he's going to go down as the greatest player to ever put on a Mississippi State uniform.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he got more notoriety for it last year. And like I said, I hate it because this year he was a better quarterback in general. But yeah, it's outside of those 3 guys, quarterback play was inconsistent at some of the other schools at best and just flat out bad at some of the schools.
I mean, Dustin and I have joked all year long about Georgia taking Grayson Lambert from UVA, and then he was their starting quarterback. It's like the situation for quarterbacks can't be very good if that's the case.
And if you look at the SEC East, I mean, as good as the West is, the East may be that bad. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, once Florida lost their starting quarterback in Greer to performance-enhancing drug test failure or whatever it was.
Yeah, steroids.
It was bad. I mean, that division was just flat out awful. The Florida was good when they had him, but once they lost him, their offense just fell apart. And yeah,
there wasn't a whole lot to karma from him leaving the state of North Carolina out of high school.
Oh, was he in North Carolina?
Yep.
I didn't know that. Wow.
And we couldn't lock him down, of course. So.
Yeah, it was a big game changer because the Florida offense and the entire East was just a dumpster fire.
So how do you feel about that? This is not one of our questions, but how do you feel about playing in an unbalanced conference where one division dominates the other division?
I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where you can. When you do come up 4-4 in SEC play, you can at least say, you know what, we played in a really good division, and coming up 4-4 is no. I mean, Mississippi State was really odd. They went 3-1 on the road, but they went 1-3 at home. So I mean, to go on the road and be able to win games in a really difficult division is good. But you kind of think, if I was in that other division, we probably would have walked away with the division easily and been playing for an SEC championship. So I don't know. It has its drawbacks, but it also has its positives. So after the last few years, because it's been this way probably for about 5 years now, you just kind of say, you know what, you just get used to it, I guess.
The similarities are uncanny.
So what I'm doing is slowly pointing out all the similarities between Mississippi State and
it's funny because I did my last show of 2015 for Bully Barkline yesterday, and I was talking with the guy who runs the Belt Bowl account, and I asked him, I said, were you prepared for the similarities between the two schools? Because the one thing I did know is that there are a lot of similarities, and he's like, it was kind of odd, that when we got the draw, that we were getting these two schools who were so similar in history, in tradition, and all these other things. So it is kind of odd.
Yeah, I definitely think it is. We whine and complain about the divisions, and I think y'all might not whine as much as we do, but it's a constant every year. Well, if we were in the Coastal, there's a chance we'd be in the championship game,
Right.
So,
Oh, yeah. There's almost every SEC. I mean, basically the way it's been the last few years, every team except for Alabama has kind of had that mantra. I mean, as good as the division is, Alabama is still far and away better than everybody else in that division. I mean, it's not even close. Auburn had a couple of good years, but it's always going to be Alabama to lose.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back and finish up with Justin and get a prediction on the game. If there's one thing state fans do well, it's tailgate. And I know for me, the most important part of a tailgate is a Wolfpack cooler. You have to ask yourself two questions. How clean is your cooler, and how cold are your drinks? Nobody wants to reach into a dirty cooler and grab a warm beer. Now, I've put rock salt in my coolers for years to try and chill beverages a little bit quicker, but a lot of times I'll either use too little or too much, and I'll have a can filled with slush. I'm also guilty of being a little bit lazy when it comes to cleaning the cooler after I'm finished with it. Then I found Frostbite cooler salt. This isn't just salt, it's salt combined with safe and organic ingredients that clean your cooler while it's getting your beer super cold. The really cool part is that it doesn't just clean your cooler, but it cleans everything that goes into it. So when you pull that beer out, it's not just going to be super cold, but the can itself is actually going to be germ-free. And it comes conveniently packaged with the perfect amount to sprinkle over 20 pounds of ice. You can find it in a growing number of stores in the Raleigh area as well as online if you're outside the Triangle. So check out coolersalt.com, that's COOLER salt.com, to find the closest location to you and see how you can have a clean and cold cooler every time. Frostbite Cooler Salt. Colder, faster, cleaner.
All right, folks, we're back after that wonderful message from our sponsor. Now, Justin, we already talked about Dak Prescott and how good he is, and I don't think most state fans realized how highly regarded he is considered in Mississippi State lore. But outside of him, what's the biggest strength and maybe the biggest weakness of this Mississippi State team? Or maybe the offense. We'll break it down the offense.
Offense is going to be in the receivers. One of the reasons that Dak is so good is because he does have some good receivers. Fred Ross he set a school record for receptions this year. He also led the team in receiving yards to Runyon Wilson. He's got a pretty decent chance of being a second or third round draft pick this year. He didn't have as good of a year as he did last year in terms of showing the ability to catch and hold on to the ball, but he still had 9 touchdown receptions on the year. He's a huge guy. He's like 6'5" or 6'6". Can just go up and get the ball when he really wants to. Plus, they've got some other guys that don't get as much opportunity simply because you got those two guys out there in front leading the way. So outside of Prescott, the receiving core is really solid for Mississippi State. Doesn't probably get the same notoriety as some of the other teams around the country, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that Dak Prescott draws so much attention. But one of the reasons that he is good is because he has some really good receivers. So on offense, that's his biggest strength. But the weaknesses, like I said earlier, it's the running game and the offensive line. If North Carolina State's going to have some success, it's going to be because they're going to be able to get some pressure on Dak Prescott because the offensive line just can't block somebody.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes into one of our strengths. You know, the only problem is containing a running quarterback or a quarterback that can run. That's been a big problem for us all year. If we do that, though, I feel like we'll get pretty good pressure. Oh, I was running through the stats earlier today and noticed that obviously Prescott doesn't throw many INTs, but you guys look like you average about 1.5 fumbles a game. Is that a concern for y'all?
The only time I can remember where a fumble really hurt Mississippi State was against Texas A&M and against Ole Miss. They have had some fumbles, but they've never really been in situations outside of those two games where you came away thinking, wow, they put themselves in a bad hole doing that. So turnovers, the biggest problem for Mississippi State turnovers is they don't cause a whole lot of turnovers. And that was kind of the one thing that we were expecting going into this year. Manny Diaz is in his second stint with the Bulldogs, and we were expecting – the one thing he did in 2010 before he left was he caused a bunch of turnovers. He gave up some yards, but the defense was taking the ball away a lot. They didn't do that this year. So fumbles, man, they don't really concern me that much because when they happen, they didn't seem to happen in really key situations except against Texas A&M and against Ole Miss.
I didn't even realize Manny Diaz was your defensive coordinator. He worked for us for a long time.
Oh, did he? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I think he was our defensive line coach or maybe secondary coach under Amato.
Okay.
Dustin, you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah. When we had a good defense.
He was in 2010. It was his first year. We got him from Middle Tennessee State in 2010. He was only here for a year, and that's when Texas hired him away, and that's when things kind of fell apart for him. Went back to Louisiana Tech last year, and Dan Mullen brought him back in. About half of our fans were happy with that. About half our fans were disgusted by it. So it was a hit or miss defense this year. There were some things with it that we liked. There were some things with it that I didn't like.
Yeah, I think for us, I think he was probably still too young, but I think he was known as a really good recruiter, and that's
he is.
what he hung his hat on with us. Yeah.
Playing off of that, we asked you about the offense. Defensively, what is the big strength, and if there's a weakness that we should look for?
The weakness isn't something that initially there isn't like one. Well, I'm not going to say that. The biggest weakness that the defense had this year that cost them in a couple of games was the fact that it seemed to take them a while to get adjusted. On a number of occasions, Mississippi State found themselves down, 10 points, 14 points. I mean, even against Louisiana Tech, I think we ended up winning like 45-17 or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the score was, but we were down 14-0 in the first quarter. That happened a lot. They were down to they were down to Southern Miss early on. They gave up a lead. They gave up leads in all four of their losses they never could recover from. So what seems to happen is the defense just takes a while to get settled in, but once they get settled in, they get locked in, then it's over. But in some of the games, they just couldn't recover from it. So that's the biggest thing. Can they get off to a good start? Because if they don't, they may end up digging themselves into a hole that they just can't climb out of. But I mean, there's no real specific weakness. The one thing the one thing that hurt them more in the two losses at the end of the year against Alabama and Ole Miss, the secondary, they had two serious injuries in the secondary. Will Redmond, a cornerback, he was projected, and he probably still is, to be anywhere from a second to a third round pick at cornerback. He ended up tearing his ACL. We had another safety, very low recruited safety, but played high above his star rating. He's only a 2-star coming out of high school, but he played much better than that once he got to state. He ended up doing the same thing, tore his ACL. So they had to put some players in the secondary, and it was very much hit or miss. But the biggest thing is, can they get off to a good start? Because they've struggled with that in a lot of their games this year.
Well, there's another similarity, isn't it, Evan?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean,
we started okay in some games, but we just hadn't been consistent. Like the Carolina game was an exception. We played terrible early on, but we've come out strong in some other games and just hadn't been able to maintain it, at least some of our higher profile games.
So what's the biggest strength of the defense?
Biggest strength of the defense is going to be in the linebacking core, and not really in the front seven in general. They do a good job of getting after the quarterback. If Chris Jones is on his game, he's impossible to stop. He was in the 2013 class, Robert Kimdichie, who's at Ole Miss, he was the number 1 rated in the entire country. Number 2 was Chris Jones. They're both defensive ends, defensive tackles. Robert Kimdichie's had a lot more success in terms of notoriety and profile. Chris Jones has struggled a little bit. He hasn't always seemed to play with the same motor that he should the entire game. But when he is dialed in, when he is focused, and when he is trying to, and when he's given 100%, there's no way to stop him. I mean, he can stand up and play at linebacker at 300 pounds if he needs to. He can put his hand down and get after the offensive line. It just depends if he's going to give out his full effort. That's been the biggest thing with him. But the linebackers are as solid as they come. They're good, solid tacklers. They're about the only people on the team that are good, solid tacklers. So Mississippi State has struggled with that some. But the strength is definitely in the front seven.
So, total picture, what does a team have to do against Mississippi State to come out with a win?
I know I've said it a lot, but it's the defensive line. If they can stay in Dak Prescott's face and they can make him hit the ground a lot, then that's about the only way that I've seen any team have any success against the Bulldogs this year. They've got to get pressure on Prescott. And they got to do it quick because it's like you were saying earlier. If it's a slow developing rush, even if they get past the offensive line, he's mobile. He's still, even though he didn't rely on his running ability as much this year, he's still mobile. He can still find time and find space in the pocket. And that's what he did a lot this year, was make throws on the run. And he can hurt you that way. But if you can get to him, if you can blow past that offensive line of Mississippi State, then you got a really good chance of having success against the Bulldogs.
So I know there's not a whole lot that you know about our team, just like we are with yours. So with limited info, is there anything at all that scares you about the matchup, or does it seem like just a win?
Nah, the main thing is, I don't know, it's one of those things where when I looked at North Carolina State, it looked like their offense was starting to come together there at the end of the year, but it looked like the defense was starting to fade a little bit. The offense worries me just because if Jacoby has a good game, he could have some success against the secondary. Like I said, we lost one of our cornerbacks, we lost one of our safeties, and the replacement cornerback especially, his name is Tolando Cleveland, he has struggled big time. If they can't figure out, if North Carolina State is able to exploit whoever they have on Tolando Cleveland, that could be a nightmare. Because that's basically what Ole Miss did to them all game long in the Egg Bowl. Mississippi State made an effort to shut down Laquan Treadwell, who's one of the best receivers in the entire country. And for the most part, they did, but it left, for the most part, Cleveland one-on-one with the receiver opposite of Treadwell, and Chad Kelly and Stringfellow, who was the other guy. They just went off that night. And anybody against Cleveland scares the living daylights out of me because he's just struggled so much. And when he got put into a starting role because of injury, it's been bad.
I think that kind of plays into your favor, just because we haven't shown all year that we can beat teams passing the ball. I mean, we're a running team without its two starting running backs. Yeah. So,
well, if you want some hope, Mississippi State has done a pretty decent job against the run, but then all of a sudden, Ole Miss, a team that doesn't run the ball well at all, they just seem to do whatever they want on offense. Like I said, there's a lot of frustration with that game, just because for the second year in a row, Mississippi State didn't look like they had looked the entire year, and that worries us as State fans just going to this bowl again, because last year after the Egg Bowl, they went to the Orange Bowl against Georgia Tech. They thought, we got a favorable matchup. And there seemed to be this hangover from the Egg Bowl, and they just never seemed to recover from it. We're a little bit afraid that we might see that same performance again, where they just don't recover from the shock of playing so poorly against Ole Miss that it carries over into the bowl game.
Yeah, I don't think we've been playing poorly. We just haven't been playing consistent. We'll put together 3 good quarters, and then we'll get blown out in one quarter, and then, that's ball game. That's how we lose.
Right.
But I think we've been playing okay, and the weird thing is I feel better with us playing on the road, kind of, even though it's basically a home game. For us, it's still a road game, still a road trip. We've played better in all of those games this year. We've won in places we haven't historically won.
Right.
And so I think that's important for us, and that makes me feel a little bit better about this game. But Dak Prescott scares the daylights out of me, that's for sure.
And he's the one, like I said, he was the one area that Mississippi State fans felt so confident about going into the season, and he's the one area in which Mississippi State fans will continue to feel confident going into the bowl game, just because he's been so rock solid. The only time he's really ever cost the Bulldogs game was last year against Alabama, and that seemed to motivate him going into this year, and that's one of the reasons I think he improved as much as he did.
So what's your prediction?
Predicting bowl games is hard.
Yeah.
Just because there are so many things that go into a bowl game. If this were just a regular season game, I would say, Mississippi State probably by a touchdown. That's probably what I'd stick with anyway. I think it will be high scoring, somewhere in the, 38-31 range, somewhere in that area. But it's just so difficult to predict a bowl game, just because who's really truly motivated to be there. I don't know, but I would just probably lean towards that direction as well. Probably somewhere around a touchdown, Mississippi State. But I seem to say that they may not show up at all, so who knows? But I would lean towards that, about Mississippi State by about a touchdown, and somewhere in the 38, 31, 41, 34 area.
I think that sounds about
it's
right.
weird to hear a SEC fan just not say we're going to win because we're better. No offense to you, but that's kind of the common thing we hear is like, oh, we'll beat them. Who are they?
You're talking to a Mississippi State fan. If you're talking to an Alabama fan or an LSU fan, it would probably be different. But yeah, when you're talking to a Mississippi State fan, it's not. You're confident and you like your conference and you believe that your conference is good and that your conference is the best. But you've seen it, and it's you believe that they're good, but you don't just believe that you're better just because you're SEC. I mean, you get past that pretty quick when you're not one of those guys.
So,
are you going to the game?
I'm not. I was hoping that I was able to, but it doesn't look like it's going to work out whether I'll be able to make it there. Still kind of keep my fingers crossed, so we'll see. My actual job as a teacher, so I'll definitely be all for it. It's just a matter of getting there. So, but
right.
I keep my fingers crossed, but as of right now, it does not look like I'll be able to make it.
And I got one more question. How many different colored cowbells do you have?
I've had more in the past, but currently I've only got one for me and one for my son. Kind of an odd story behind that. My wife actually bought them for me on my 30th birthday. She got one for me. She got one for my son, and she's an Ole Miss grad. So that was a pretty big step, and that was pretty strong on her part to actually go out and buy a cowbell and get them decorated. Because the way you do it at Mississippi State, you don't buy your own cowbell. They have to be gifted to you.
That's awesome.
One of those weird tradition things.
I always said we talked about in our last podcast that, people call us the Cow College. We should have cowbells. I think that's fantastic. I want to annoy the hell out of people with those things.
And we love them. The SEC even actually made a change in the rules for them because for a long time they were banned, but Mississippi State never did anything about them. But they changed the rules a couple of years ago where basically you could ring them except for when the team was like breaking out of the huddle. Then they changed it to where you had to stop ringing when they went over center. And for the most part, Mississippi State fans have abided by the rule because we were basically told, you know what, if you don't abide by them, we're going to make you guys crack down. We'll have metal detectors. You can make it work. So we love them. If you ought to adopt them.
We already stole some of your hashtags and all the other marketing
this is our
campaigns.
state.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody put that on Twitter the other day, and I saw that. I was like, I knew I'd seen it somewhere else, and I just couldn't remember what other school it was. And that's when I saw it. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that now.
See, we got similarities all over the board.
Like, we hated that because anytime we lost the game, it was thrown in our face.
Oh yeah,
by any school. So
yeah, I think that they kind of got. I think Mississippi State was just trying to. I honestly don't think they meant it as what it came across as, but it's one of those things where once it gets out there, it's like, oh yeah, that kind of does look like we're rubbing stuff in people's faces, but we're okay with it. We've gotten used to it at this point.
All right, man. We'll let you go. I was just going to ask one more final question. Overall, how do you see the playoff working out?
Good question. I don't know. I really think I don't think Michigan State's going to be able to beat Clemson. I just don't see that happening. I'm just not that big a fan of Michigan State. I think Clemson probably handles them pretty easily. Oklahoma and Alabama, that's a little bit different. Doesn't
Clemson play Oklahoma?
Yeah, Clemson plays Oklahoma, Alabama plays Michigan State.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. My bad. I think at one time that was the way I was thinking it was going to work out. Okay, I still think Clemson. I think it's going to be Clemson, Alabama. I really believe that. I don't think Alabama's going to lose 2 years in a row in the semifinal. I just don't see Saban letting them do that. And I'll be real honest with you. I kind of lean towards Clemson just because I like Watson. I think he's really, really good. I think he's much more – I don't think he's as good as people are giving him credit for, and which is really scary because I think a lot of people just think that, well, it's the ACC, so he's winning because he doesn't have any competition. I don't think that's true. At least that's just the impression I've gotten whenever I've watched coverage of Clemson. So as of right now, I kind of lean towards Clemson winning a close one over Alabama.
Well, that'd be nuts. Yeah. I can't say I'm that confident in Clemson, but I do agree with you. Deshaun Watson is really good, and he does not get the credit he deserves.
Yeah, arm or leg, either way, he can beat you. He's fantastic, and I'm pretty upset we have another year playing him. So,
oh God, yeah, no, let him go pro already.
Yeah, and we have to play there next year too. So,
yeah, fantastic.
Well, Justin, man, we appreciate you coming on. You helped us a lot. So,
no problem. I appreciate it, man.
And that'll be it for this one, and we'll talk to y'all later.